Thank you, member. The member for Vancouver West End.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, members will be not surprised that I'm speaking about renters, tenants, landlords, and housing, since I think it's the first speech I ever gave in this House 9 years ago was on that very topic, and I sure have given a few since then, because tenants have been running on a treadmill. My constituents tell me, and they use metaphors like just barely keeping their head above water, that they're carrying a weight, a burden on their backs that seems to keep getting heavier, that they're not sure if they can do it. I'm speaking, Honourable Speaker, about a challenge of both affordability and fairness in the rental. Some would call it the rental market, some would say housing, some would just say your ability to live with a roof over your head, because it's a challenge, particularly if you're a renter. In my constituency, 80% rent. Across the province, it's about 45%. And in much of Metro Vancouver, Metro Victoria, and indeed in some of the smaller centres as well, we're seeing vacancy rates of 0.5%. What's that like if you're a renter, Honourable Speaker? Well, it means if you're searching for housing, it means that 99.5%, if the vacancy rate is 0.5%, of the housing is closed to you. That you can knock on all those doors, and almost every single one that you're ever going to find is not available to you. And then when you add on to that vacancy issue the challenge of affordability, it can be even less than that. Because rents have shot through the roof over the last many years in this province. We can just do the annual allowable rent increase over the last 15 years, and that could be a 50% rent increase over that time, if not more. Now, of course, many renters see the rents increase in between occupancy of suites of thousands of dollars. A constituent of mine was telling me the other day, the suite next to theirs is renting for $1,000 more than the suite they're in. They pay their rent every month, but that suite became vacant, and the landlord can now charge whatever they choose, because the vacancy rate is so low, and they know people have to have a roof over their head, so we'll scrimp, save, we'll grab loans, we'll take whatever they can get to find a place to live, because we have not seen an increase in supply of housing in the last many years, and that's created this vacancy crisis. But it's also led to a challenge of predatory behavior, of greed. And that's where I think the government finally is starting to take action, and we should have seen action years ago to deal with some of the predatory behavior happening in the rental market, happening between landlords and tenants. I know my friends on the other side used to describe their housing action as the best plan in North America, that everything was turning up daisies and roses, that those who complained about housing challenges of affordability and rental housing, I think as the housing minister said, like to wake up and whine, that was simply what it was when people were complaining about the housing crisis in BC. But you know, Honourable Speaker, when a huge number of my population, my constituents, are one paycheck away from homelessness, and when we've seen homelessness more than double to some of the highest rates in BC's history, we do have a crisis, and I think we need to acknowledge it. It's been fed by rent evictions, by the use of geographic area increase clause, by the fixed-term tenancy, which I know we're debating now, so I won't speak on that one. But we have challenges because there's no place for people to go, so abuse of the law can continue apace because there's always somebody to fill the supply. That if you're a bad landlord, if you break the rules, even if people know that, they'll still be forced to essentially move into your home because they have no choices of where else to live. So what do we do about it, Honourable Speaker? As many of us have been calling for years, we need to actually take leadership on this from a government level. We need to move to amend and change, open up the Residential Tenancy Act so that we can go after some of those things that landlords have used to abuse the law to evict or to face increased massive rent increases like the geographic area increase, like the fixed term, like rent evictions, like the annual allowable rent numbers. We need to look at those issues, reach out to the landlord community as well, and find a way to make them fairer so that, one, tenants aren't being abused by the few predatory landlords, and that landlords continue to rent out those suites and be able to do their business. And that's an important point, Honourable Speaker, and I think Some will say it's all about the renters. I also look at the challenge of being a landlord, and I think one of the things that we need to reflect on is when you have a supply problem, the lack of affordable supply, you also need to look at why. And there are people in this community and communities across BC who've taken their properties off the market because they've had a bad issue with a tenant. A tenant has destroyed the suite, skipped out on rent, and then they went to the residential tenancy branch for help and couldn't get anywhere, couldn't get compensation, couldn't find a way to find fairness. So that also needs to be addressed, Honourable Speaker, and I know it wasn't addressed in the last number of years, but landlords need help too, and I know our government is committed to working with landlords as well as tenants to find a way to increase the supply of housing, but also to make it fairer so that people cannot be abused. What else do we need to do, Honourable Speaker? We need actually to use the administrative penalty provisions in the law to go after those that break the law. Unfortunately, the approach to landlords who've broken the law and tenants who've broken the law over the last many number of years has been, oh, well, if you ever get caught, if they actually ever rule against you, is basically, well, just give the money back. So it would be like saying, we caught a bank robber, and hey, if you give the money back, well, okay, fine. No muss, no foul, go on your way. That's been the approach of the former government, and I hope we find a way to be stronger in our enforcement of the rules, because I have constituents who can show me the number of times that they've had the law enforced, they find a way to actually get the law enforced and get some money back, but the actual cost to them of the landlord breaking the law is way higher than what they ever get back. And in fact, that costs us all too, because a landlord would have been abusing the residential tenancy branch system, something we all pay for through our taxes, just to try and gouge the system to get more rent. And that's not fair, Honourable Speaker. That's a lack of fairness, and I think leads to that feeling of being pushed underwater and never getting a chance to get ahead.
Thank you, Member.